The Gentleman is written and directed by Guy Ritchie and stars Hugh Grant, Matthew McConaughey, Colin Farrell, Charlie Hunnam, Michelle Dockery and Jeremy Strong, just to name a few. And to sum up, the plot of this movie is a little bit tricky because there's so much going on. So all I'm really going to say is that if you've seen Guy Ritchie's earlier movies, like Snatch or Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, then you'll kind of understand the gist of this movie. It's a gangster movie set in the UK where loads of separate stories just end up converging into one by the end of it. Now, as you're all aware, there are currently no brand new releases currently coming out at the moment, which is why I took this opportunity to catch up on another 2020 release that came out back in January that I unfortunately missed in the cinemas before this whole lockdown thing happened. And that was, of course, Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman. Because Guy Ritchie is a person whose filmography I've been meaning to get more into over the last few years. I've seen Snatch and I love it, but in regards to his other movies, they're kind of something that I keep meaning to watch. And the fact that I'd heard so much praise about The Gentleman when it came out back in January, that it was one of the best January movies to ever come out, and that it was a return to form for Guy Ritchie, especially considering after last year's disastrous Aladdin movie that he did, I was really intrigued to see what he was going to do with The Gentleman. And I'm just going to say it. I was really pleasantly surprised by this movie, so much so that this is probably the most entertaining movie I've seen so far in 2020. Yeah, Extraction was good, but it did have a few things holding it back, such as a predictable story. And even though The Invisible Man was a lot better than Extraction, I do think The Gentleman is miles better than both of those two movies combined. This movie is just unadulterated fun, and you can definitely see that this movie is Guy Ritchie throwing everything he has at the screen, both in terms of his screenwriting ability and his filmmaking ability. You can tell that, like, the last few projects he's done, which have been these big budget movies where he kind of maybe hasn't had as much creative freedom as he's wanted to have as compared to what he used to do with, like, Snatch and Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. But here you can see that that leash has almost kind of been completely taken away, and he's got full reign to do whatever he wants. And you can tell that both him and the entire cast are having a ton of fun with the making of this movie, because every single shot of this movie just oozes charisma, confidence, and most importantly, fun. In a similar vein to Snatch, this movie tells a somewhat complicated story in a way that doesn't treat its audience like idiots, and instead treats it with a lot of fun and in a light-hearted sense, which makes it more palatable for the audience, which is probably why this movie ended up being as enjoyable as it was to watch. This is without a doubt one of the funniest movies I've seen in a long time, and the characters do not hold back in what they say. There's a lot of racial slurs thrown left, right and centre at different types of people, whether it be Asians or women or other, minorities. And in most other movies that may seem a bit too much or a bit too offensive or a bit cringy, but here it's done in such a humorous and clever way that even though what some of these characters are saying is truly awful, you can't help but laugh at what they're saying because of the way it's written and the way it's delivered by some of these characters. But yeah, without a doubt, one of my favourite aspects of the movie is the script, because it kept me constantly engaged from start to finish, but also managed to find new ways to have me laughing my arse off in a few specific scenes. There are some scenes in particular that, just from the way certain lines are delivered, had me in hysterics. And I feel like that is much needed, especially in a time like this. I've been waiting for a movie to come along and make me laugh as much as this movie did, and thankfully The Gentleman came along and supplied that much needed entertainment value and humour that I've been looking for in a new release. And thankfully, The Gentleman has humour and charisma and confidence, and more importantly, entertainment value in spades. And this brilliant script is just strengthened by the entire cast. There is not a single weak link in terms of performances in this entire movie. Matthew McConaughey is really threatening, but also very calculated as the owner of this weed empire known as Mickey Pearson. He's really, really good in this movie. There are a few scenes where he kind of can feel a bit, held back in terms of the threatening persona that this character is maybe meant to have. But that being said, a few scenes later, he can be the threatening gangster boss that you're kind of wanting to see out of him. And I thought that he balanced those two aspects really well. Charlie Hunnam was bloody brilliant in this movie, and that's saying something considering every film I've seen him in, I haven't really been the biggest fan of him. Every film that I've seen him in, I always think his performance is either trying too hard or it's just not really doing it for me. Even a movie that I absolutely adore, such as Children of Men, I do think he is the one thing about it that holds it back. But here, he's genuinely brilliant, and is probably one of my favourite performances in the whole film. There's a slight charisma to his character, and he's very suave in a certain sense. But that being said, if you look at that guy the wrong way, all he would have to do is snap his fingers and your head would be cut off. He manages to find that fine line between being very likeable and also being very threatening in a cool and calculated sense. And I really liked that about his performance. Hugh Grant was also fantastic in this movie, and the majority of the comedic moments come from his character, and specifically the interactions that he has with Charlie Hunnam's character. And the banter between the two of them is a little bit awkward, but also kind of tense at the same time, and I just loved the scenes with those two in it, because you kind of don't know where that whole side plot is going, but after a certain point, you start to see where it's going and what the point of it is in the overarching movie. And yeah, their chemistry together just works really well, because you can tell that Hugh Grant is trying to pull Charlie Hunnam's strings, but that being said, Charlie Hunnam is not taking shit from anybody, so they're kind of just at this awkward, phase in the conversation where nothing is really progressing, and I really like that. And that, like I said, that is where the majority of the humour in the movie comes from, is Hugh Grant and Charlie Hunnam's chemistry, and also some of the things that come out of Hugh Grant's mouth. I suppose my only flaw with the movie is that the first 20 to 30 minutes can be a little bit hard to follow, purely because you're not quite sure where it's trying to go. But that being said, after a certain thing happens in the movie, I won't give it away, because I feel like you need to go into this movie as blind as possible to appreciate just the complexity of the story alone. But after a certain thing happens, you then start to figure out what the movie's trying to do, where it's trying to go, and the movie becomes a lot more fluid after that point. It just flows a lot better and all fits into place from that point onwards, and becomes a much more enjoyable experience. Everyone back in January was spot on. The Gentleman is indeed Guy Ritchie's return to form after quite a few years of a career that doesn't quite seem to know where it's going. The Gentleman is a stamp on that career that shows that he is back with full force, and he is back to the genre that he pretty much is the master of at this point, which is why I'm going to give The Gentleman an 8.5 out of 10. This is without a doubt the most entertaining and just most fun I've had with a movie all year. I do think Snatch is a slightly better movie, because it tackles the whole aspect of multiple storylines converging onto one a little bit better and a lot smoother in Snatch than it does here. But that being said, don't let that put you off watching The Gentleman. It is a ton of fun and is a true blast from start to finish, with fantastic performances across the board and a script that is both very, very funny, but also very tongue-in-cheek as well, and also very self-referential and fourth wall breaking. So guys, that was my review of The Gentleman. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.